With the original Breath of the Wild taking a little over 5 years to see a release, a lot of people thought that the sequel should have come out a little sooner than that. I mean, after all, the most time-consuming aspect of the first game had to have been reinventing the formula from the ground up, so the second game really should have been a lot easier to make. But somehow, someway, the possibility of the second game taking even longer to come out than the first game seems more and more likely as time goes on, so the $20 question in hand here seems to be just why the frig that is. And, well, despite the fact that my inside source at Nintendo stopped talking to me after I had disrespected his father at Thanksgiving, I think I know what the holdup may be, so make sure you're subscribed if you're a badass, and I'll tell you all about it. Alright, so the most obvious reason as to why this dang old Zoltar game's taken so long to make is probably because of that PBR virus that's been going around in the past year. While I have no doubt that that's probably the main thing that's been holding this game up for so long, I still feel like there's some other factors at play for the above-average sized end. I mean, the first Breath of the Wild took about 5 years to come out, but I don't believe for 1 second that they couldn't have put that game out a lot sooner than they did. I just think that Nintendo saw how bad the Wii U was tanking and decided not to waste Breath of the Wild on a console that could never be saved. And they also probably didn't want to make the same mistake on the Switch by not having a massive game ready at launch, and since Mario Odyssey was still a little ways off, they figured they might as well save Breath of the Wild for another year or so. And sure, this was kind of a dick move for the Wii U owners, but then again, so was releasing the Switch when they did in the first place. Besides, you could still play Breath of the Wild on the Wii U anyway, so it's not like there were any broken promises or anything like that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Breath of the Wild could have come out like 3 years earlier or anything like that, but if Nintendo hadn't taken the extra time to port the game over to the Switch, then I'm pretty sure the process could have been expedited on the Wii U. And if this is true, which I tend to believe that it is, then that would mean that Breath of the Wild really took about 4 years to make, which means that Nintendo already spent more time on the sequel as it is. However, I do think it's important to remember that the Master Trials and Champions Ballad DLC were reasonably hefty and probably took a little bit of time to make as well. So while I'm sure Nintendo had plans for Breath of the Wild sequel not long after finishing the original game, I doubt they were fully on board guns blazing until after the DLC was already finished at the very earliest. Even after they finished the DLC, I'm sure they probably took a long enough break to take a shit dump. Again, though, we do have to give Nintendo a little bit of wiggle room for the COVID shutdowns and all that, and I know people like to boast that other developers were still coming out with games during the pandemic, but when you take a look at the whole Cyberpunk fiasco, it's kinda hard to be mad at Nintendo for taking a little extra time for something as important as a sequel to the most popular Zelda game ever made. Or I mean, arguably the most popular Zelda game ever, whatever. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's my personal favorite. Besides, just because a game's not being released doesn't necessarily mean that it's not finished yet. Sometimes it could just be publishers wanting to space things out a little bit. Although in the case of Breath of the Wild 2, I'm pretty sure Nintendo needs more time on it, seeing as how they're giving a Skyward Sword in the meantime. I mean, it is kind of hard to imagine how the game could possibly take so long, what with the foundation already being laid out and all that, but since they seem to be taking their time with this, I think it's safe to say that the game's gonna rip all kinds of ass when it finally does come out. After the reception the first game got, there was already a lot of pressure to hit a home run with the sequel, and after all this time, people are really going to be expecting a lot. But you know what? I really think those rascals at Nintendo can get the job done here. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that once people get their hands on the sequel, it's going to be pretty difficult to go back to the original. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people who will, because after spending hundreds of hours on one game, it's kind of hard not to feel some sort of an attachment towards it. But at the risk of inciting a poop war in the comments section, I think the original Breath of the Wild left a lot of room for improvement. Don't get me wrong, I still played it for over 150 hours and bought all the DLC. Plus, I can't say that it wasn't an outstanding first attempt at trying something so drastically different from what's worked just fine in the past. But like, is there really one good reason to justify why rain exists in the game the way that it does? I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with it if there was some kind of an upgrade or outfit where you could climb during storms, or at least materials or benefits you could only gather during rainfall. But like, whenever it rains, your only two options are to either give up exploring the area you were working on, which is really frustrating if you spend a lot of time there already, or you just kind of put your controller down and wait like 5 to 10 minutes before you could resume. And oh yeah, you also gotta get naked while you wait too if you don't want to get struck by lightning. Kinda like when I was waiting for my stepdad to pick me up from the mall last week.
Don't fuck with me or I'll shove a lightning bolt up your ass!
Plus, there's also all the malarkey with weapons breaking, which I don't necessarily hate as much as most people do, but I do wish they'd last a little bit longer, because it's kind of hard to get excited over crafting something new if it's just gonna break in like 5 minutes. Personally, I'm not really a fan of the horses here, since so much of the game requires you to climb things, and seeing as how I like collecting any materials I see, it's kinda lame that I have to constantly dismount all the time to gather them, when there could've just been an option to pick them up on the horse. But still though, the horse music's pretty outstanding, although while I love the rest of the music in the game as well, I kinda wish that there were more songs that were memorable. I mean, yeah, an overworld theme would have gotten old really fast, but even though the music does fit for what the game's going for, I kinda miss having like 20 to 30 tracks that get stuck in my head for weeks like most of the other games. You know what, all those are really just nitpicks, and they don't really bother me all that much. However, my biggest issue with the game is definitely with the lack of variety in the puzzles. Like, I get that the game wants to give you access everywhere right from the start, but with there only being a handful of items in the game, the solutions to the puzzles can get pretty repetitive sometimes. Like, honestly, how many friggin' test of strength shrines do we really need? There are a few other minor issues that I have with the game, but I'm not trying to turn this into a review or anything like that. All I'm really trying to say is that there's definitely things that could be done to make the next game way better. And since Nintendo's spending so much time on it, I'm sure there's gonna be improvements that even my nitpicky ass never thought of. And honestly, I can't friggin' wait, even though the entire point of this video is why we have to. But if I had to guess on when this game's coming out, though, then I'd be as bold as to say that March of 2022 is gonna be the date. Because first of all, it'd be the 5-year anniversary of the first game, and also because with Skyward Sword coming out in July, it'd be kinda weird to have two Zelda games competing with each other on the holiday season. I mean, they didn't have Mario 3D All-Stars competing with Mario 3D World, which is why that game came out in February, which I'm sure led to many confused dads buying the wrong game for their little ones. Either way, though, I'm definitely not losing any sleep over Breath of the Wild sequel, not just because my backlog's insane right now, but mainly because I want the game to be as good as it can be rather than dealing with another Cyberpunk dilemma. Although, if I'm being completely honest, my Cyberpunk didn't really glitch all that much. But anyway, that's all for today, though. If you liked this video, then you should check my Zelda tier list out, but for now, I gotta go pay my egg bills. Later!
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.